Great. So thank you so much for having me here, and I feel honored to be on a panel with experts, but particularly with these experts at the end. Just to kind of back up a little bit, I think that this has come up several times in the course of this discussion, is why people are living in three-quarter houses. And we've kind of said, you know, there's these terrible conditions, it's really onerous. At the end of the day, it's pretty clear that the reason that people are living in three-quarter houses is because they have nowhere else to stay. And just for full disclosure and disclaimer, I work at a legal project at MFY Legal Services that represents three-quarter house residents. It's been in operation for about 5 years. I'm obviously coming from a biased perspective. I don't get phone calls about three-quarter houses that have excellent conditions, where the people are being treated very nicely and things are going great. So my experience is coming from what I hear on a day-to-day basis from tenants and people who are former tenants, or in some cases people who are future tenants, people who are on a path that may likely end up leading them to a three-quarter house. And so with that said, I do want to reiterate what Ann said at the beginning, is that the work that we do at MFY, and I think that I could speak for the three-quarter house tenant organizing project in saying, is not that we're looking for enforcement to shut three-quarter houses down. We want to broaden the discussion, increase awareness, so that people can have safe, stable housing. And so when we're out here talking about people's rights and some of the violations of rights that are happening to people, want to be very clear that this is because we want to improve conditions, not slam the doors shut in an enforcement that is going to simply create more crisis. So many people don't know what three-quarter houses are, and the question then becomes, how do three-quarter house tenants know what three-quarter houses are? How do they end up in three-quarter houses? And I think there was a little bit of discussion about the recruitment process. And I think that's a kind of a key place to start, because a lot of the three-quarter houses, again, not all of them, really make an effort to hold themselves out as programs. So in some cases, they offer literature that call themselves supportive housing programs. And they have really kind of motivational names like Uplifting Men, or Steps to Better Living, House of Hope. And it's kind of this, you get this feeling that you're like, I'm gonna get help from this guy. Like, it's get back on your feet, come get our services, we are gonna make stability your reality. And what they do is they'll conduct presentations. They'll do them at jails, they'll do them at prisons, detox centers, hospitals. Formerly, there were presentations also done at the city shelters, but to the credit of DHS, a regulation was implemented that prevented referrals to be made to three-quarter houses. So we've seen a steep decline in referrals coming from shelters. So they go and do these presentations and promise services. You know, we're going to help you get some job training, and then do what we need to do to help you get stable, safe, stable housing that will be permanent for you down the road. As Wesley alluded to, when you get to the three-quarter house, you find a completely different reality. Those services are non-existent. Instead, what people find is that in many cases, again, not always, people are just, the condition of living in a three-quarter house is that they go to an outpatient drug treatment program. And that's one of the key reasons why this area is such a gray area, and it's very confusing for people to understand what a three-quarter house is because the outpatient substance abuse treatment program is a licensed program. It's licensed by the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services by the state. But the house is not. The house is a landlord. And so because the houses, the landlords, often require people to attend the outpatient drug treatment program, they're kind of wrapping that in to say, we are a program, because as a condition of living in our house, we're requiring you to go to the drug treatment program of our choice. And I think the of our choice is important, because the three-quarter house in many cases isn't simply saying we care about the tenants and want to make sure they're getting the services to treat their substance abuse needs that they need. Because if that were the case, they would be satisfied with a person just saying, I'm going to a program, it works for me, and I'm going to continue doing that. But that's not what we're hearing. What we hear is people could be attending a program that does work for them. They move into the three-quarter house and are told if they don't transfer to the substance abuse treatment program of the choice of the landlord, that they're going to be asked to leave, would be the charitable way to talk about what the three-quarter house is saying you can either go to the program that we say or you're going to get kicked out. And so everyone that lives in these three-quarter houses is often required to sign a packet of information that includes a waiver of tenant rights. And the packet includes kind of all these house rules. And the packet is identical for every single resident. And I think as the experiences from the end of the table have demonstrated already today, people's experiences are not identical. And the uniqueness of the individual and the specific needs of individuals that supportive housing programs identify and work with are not what three-quarter houses are doing. It's a one-size-fits-all model that does not fit all. And so that kind of leads into the business model of three-quarter houses and how they're working, how they're making money, and how that affects the tenants. Anne alluded to this practice of people going to the outpatient drug treatment program and then finding out that after they've graduated, after they've gone successfully for 6 to 9 months, which just so happens to be the approximate time that Medicaid will reimburse attendance at the substance abuse program if one is successful being clean. They find in many cases that their belongings are packed up and then thrown out on the curb, and they've been discharged or transferred. That's a euphemism for they're being illegally evicted. And just to be very clear about what the law is, it's a law that we talk about so often, and it sounds very straightforward because it really is after you've lived anywhere in New York City for 30 days, the only person that can evict you is a judge. And I'll just use that to say that I did put 2 Know Your Rights flyers, one in English, one in Spanish in the back. Maybe useful to pick one up, it kind of lays it out. And then another packet that has a couple of cases, and one of which I'm going to talk about right now, that really identifies the crux of the issue and why the illegal eviction issue is such a problem. I think on its face it's a problem because it's illegal, but it's particularly problematic for people who may be good candidates for supportive housing for the following reason. The very first case that I had was an individual who had been living in a three-quarter house. He was referred there by his parole officer. So just to, again, the three-quarter house is not run by parole. It's not a halfway house. It's simply a private entity that's operating a housing facility. Parole said, this is your approved housing. You can live in this three-quarter house. The gentleman moved to the three-quarter house, successfully completed the drug treatment program that the house required. And then after he had completed, they said, you have to move out. He was up in the Bronx living in a house, and they told him that they were going to send him to a house down in Brooklyn. He didn't really want to go to Brooklyn. He was feeling safe. He was in compliance with his parole directive, and said, I know my rights. That I've been here for over 30 days. You have to evict me to kick me out. So what they did instead is they told him that he was transferred and illegally evicted him. They just packed up his stuff and put him out. As an aside, they kicked out 2 other people who they were also transferring to the house in Brooklyn. Those 2 individuals went to Brooklyn, knocked on the door, and were told, what are you talking about? We don't have any beds here. So the gentleman that I met, my client, Mr. Gregory, who's in the case in the back, was promised when he moved into the three-quarter house that the three-quarter house would help him to fill out his 2010E application. And then in a subsequent meeting that we had with the three-quarter house, after Mr. Gregory went to housing court, and to his credit, stood up for his rights in a case that took over a month. I think it took 6 weeks for him to get to his decision, which basically meant 6 weeks of homelessness in violation of parole. And then we had to go talk to the same three-quarter house operator, and the three-quarter house operator says, Mr. Gregory just slipped through the cracks. And it would, if it weren't so disingenuous, I think that we could have some compassion. But everyone was slipping through the cracks with this organization. And so Mr. Gregory, a person who could have been an excellent candidate for someone who just needed a stable place to stay and stay in his community so he could remain safe and continue living his life in a positive way, was rendered homeless, was placed by parole back in a three-quarter house that was operated by the same entity, and then ultimately was briefly reincarcerated as a result of in part due to the lack of stable housing that he was unable to acquire. And I can continue, or I think maybe we should broaden it up to.
Okay.